We're back now, and we will now discuss carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration at this point. At this time, we will have Mr. Bob.
All right, I'll make sure I get close enough here. My name is Bob Adair. I'm with Advantis Consulting, representing Louisiana Mid-Continent Oil and Gas Association, Louisiana Chemical Association, and Louisiana Oil and Gas Association. So what we did prepare, and we are not trying to drive this meeting by any means, but we tried to anticipate what you might ask, so we've already presented the proposal to you, of course. But what we prepared is what I'm calling a background on the proposal, which might give you some insight into what led us to the proposal. So that's what I want to go through today, and it's only about a dozen slides. And by the way, if you tell me if you have certain concerns, whether it's carbon capture, pipelines, or sequestration, if you tell me if you have specific concerns in those areas, I can probably go faster through the other ones so you don't have to hear all this. That's going to be long anyway. But I've got my mouse in my hand here, and she's going to do it over there. She's going to be the driver. So we'll start. This is very basic, and we are. You guys. I recognize you're new to the commission, and that's the only reason I'm mentioning this. And I apologize if it's too elementary, but this is what, when we got together, the industry committee got together with the assessors. We had this in mind, the economic life. And you'll see the words useful and contribute. Those are the key words in either definition, whether it's the Tax Commission rules or the IWO, which is the International Association of Assessing Officers. So that's the basic. So we'll go to the next one, and just to give you an idea, this is in table 2503A. So this is the Tax Commission's table, and if you look at that table, it's in alphabetical order. It's a long list of multiple pages. It has the economic life on the right column. So to give you an idea, to help you get an idea of what is in each economic life category, I just put some of these items in here. Now, granted, none of these items are related to carbon capture, but my point was to give you an idea of what other types of business properties are in these different economic lives. So the next slide, 12 years, and you heard me talk about 12 years a little bit later, but those are the items that are generally in the 12-year category. And so, and as I've noted at the bottom, this is not a complete list by any means of all of everything in those lives. But I've highlighted chemical industry at the end because that was our upper limit, because we considered the chemical industry has less risk in general compared to the CCUS property. So that's kind of our bookend on the other end. So we'll go through, and again, this was proposed in June of 2023. Industry this is before we got to the joint proposal stage of discussing with the assessors. Industry prepared this information from our committee. So the I'm not going to read this to you, but I'll just basically say direct air capture we considered had the lowest economic life. This is the type of, I'm not an engineer, but I've seen and talked to a lot of engineers about this, that it's basically capturing air from the general air, and it's processing it. And so the economics of that, there are only 18 in Europe, United States, and Canada as of June 2023. And what I've heard, hadn't been much added since then. So that is on the low end, and there's a lot of unknowns about this technology, how efficient it'll be. So which explains why there aren't many in the world. So the next step up is post-combustion carbon capture, which is mostly in power plants. And what we have listed under here, that's generally applies to the other categories, that tax credits and ESG, environmental social governance, those are big drivers, and they're intangible parts of it. So I'll just go quickly. We can come back to this if you want. And so we'll go to the next one. And this is CCUS pipelines. So in our initial proposal, we did have 8 years kind of as an overall life, because the idea was the entire CCUS project had an economic life. So that's where we were. And of course, the last bullet was, if it was repurposed other than CCUS, then it would revert back to a normal pipeline. So with that background, that is what was proposed. And as I said, it was replaced. So we'll keep going. And we can always come back to any of these slides that you want. So the compromise, how we got to the compromise was, we need to go back one. Yeah. There you go. Okay. The first bullet was, we had hours of discussions with the assessors committee and among ourselves, it's industry. So there's so many pieces of this puzzle or this agreement was, it came down to a compromise that if one or more components change, then it might change the willingness of either side, the assessors or the industry might have reluctance to approve the whole. So as you know, with any compromise, there's on both sides, people don't really like it, but this is what was compromised. So for simplicity, we agreed on one life for equipment, which was 12 years. And you'll see the three primary, and again, I'm trying to boil this down to a lot of data into sound bites, I guess. So there are three primary points that we talked about, which was the current federal tax credit, various challenges for CCUS viability reported by industry and government sources. So that the industry sources were from CCUS groups, they're from the government sources were often from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, other groups, other government sources throughout the world, and because it's a worldwide issue. And then the logical upper limit of 15 years for the chemical industry. And our thought was that CCUS has much more risk, economic risk, compared to chemical industry in general. So that's how we came to 12 years. The lateral pipelines were recognized as the economic risk the same as carbon capture equipment, which is 12 years. Now, again, lateral pipelines are those that are coming from one source to the transmission line. So that it has that economic risk because it's only one source. So it'd be very similar to the equipment, the carbon capture equipment. As we say, industry reluctantly agreed to an economic life of 26.5 years, which is what's in Chapter 13 currently for local assessed pipelines. And to be fair, the assessors reluctantly agreed on 12 years for lateral pipelines, but they understood the logic, I think. So that's, and again, a transport line is envisioned to, it's sort of like an oil and gas gathering system. Whereas an oil well has one lease line going to a gathering system just for that well. But the gathering system gathers it for multiple. So it's similar to the transmission line, is similar to a gathering system for oil and gas. And we talked about that among our group. So we decided, again, as a compromise, that the transmission lines that carried multiple sources from laterals, that would be the higher life. So then we go to sequestration property. We recognize that there will be significant costs in this to install the wells. However, it's a permanent carbon disposal. And I'll just leave it at that for environmental benefit. So everybody acknowledged this point, and we decided, you'll go back, okay. So that's when we decided that it would have a relatively low value because it is a disposal well. And industry has said from what we have read, and this is in our proposal, our written proposal also, that we We anticipate the future sales of CCUS property. It's because we only have one sale as of now. And I'll be glad to talk to you about that if you want. But it may be packaged with an income producing property. So we decided a cost per foot or value per foot times depth would be a reasonable value. So the next slide, I think, oh, this is very important, especially for the assessors. So in our initial joint proposal, it was in the introduction. Some of this similar language was in the introduction. But when we talked to the assessors more, they really wanted it to be in the actual rules. So during our rebuttal part, we submitted these items to be in the rules. And it basically, we recognize the rules can be changed every year. We realize that the tax commission has these hearings every year. They could be changed anytime. But we wanted to make this clear that this is the best of what we know now, and our good faith effort of what we think is a reasonable market values parameters. So, but of course that can change if we have more market data or operational data. So, so we got the summary, I believe, is next. And that's what you saw earlier. I'm going kind of fast here, and there's one more slide, I think, and we want to make this, we'll go, oh no, there's two more. Okay. This is just a chart of the composite multipliers in the tables that we mentioned. The red the orange, we mentioned a 5-year life was for the direct air capture that we have since had a compromise to include in one, but that would have been the valuation path for if you just apply the cost by year and it would go down to a minimum value. Notice that this is not intended to be, this is not book value. This is appraised value. So it comes down to a minimum value, and it's above 20%, as you see. And you might wonder, well, why do some of them go above the first year? Why does it go up? That's because inflation is higher than the depreciation on those, and the composite multipliers is a combination of inflation times percent good, which is the inverse of depreciation. So, so you'll see the dark green line, that's CCUS equipment. We'll go next one. We just wanted to kind of leave you with this. This is our last slide, and let you know our intent, and I've reviewed this with Gabe again, even this morning, and that we had 3 objectives. And realizing that the tax commission you have the decision. We realize that. But our objectives was to have valuation guidelines that would help. It would just provide more parameters for going forward. And then improved planning was important because there've been announced projects and there are potentially more announced projects. So, and I've been active in that, developing those models for years, and they can model for 20 to 25 years. So what are the property taxes going to be? So it's good to have for our companies to have some parameters to model. And of course, assessors are asked about these properties, and they need to plan for the valuation of these properties and and then lastly, minimize valuation disputes. Since this was a compromise between business associations and the Assessors Association, and we compromised on this. Of course, we're not holding all of the industry side or all of the assessor side bound to this, but we think it will minimize the CCUS valuation disputes and appeals. So we thought these were 3 objectives we wanted to keep in mind. So with that, that's background, like I said, of how we got to our proposal, and we do appreciate the commission asking us back to discuss this matter, and we realize it's brand new. There's a lot that's unknown. We recognize that, even within our companies when they discuss these projects, there's a lot unknown. So with that, I've probably talked too long. and open to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bob. Any questions by the commissioners?
Mr. Chair, I have a couple of questions. So the quick and dirty, the ask is in setting, understanding the objectives, but in a nutshell, 12-year life for all lines. Or, so my question, that's one question, where I'm trying to go back to what you presented is a differentiation between what is a lateral line to a transmission line. Did I say that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. And so I'll go back to the beginning. I'll try to summarize what I think you presented. You're electing under Chapter 25 to place these carbon capture assets.
Correct.
Okay.
13 and 25. 13 is pipelines, 25 is the equipment.
Okay.
Yes.
So, Mrs. Banks, could you go back to first slide? Let's just start from the beginning, if you don't mind. Please. Second slide, I'm sorry. Okay, third slide. There you go. So this is Chapter 25, correct? The table for
Correct,
Chapter
correct.
25.
Yes.
Okay. One more slide, please. So 12 years at present, this is what the rules state under Chapter 25.
Correct.
But you're
Although it-
representing it's not all inclusive.
Correct. Correct.
But if it specifically said carbon capture would be dynamite, right?
Carbon capture would be in that, included in that list if adopted.
If adopted.
Mhm.
But at present, these are the general, so dry cleaning, feed mills, nothing close to carbon capture,
Correct.
nothing close to a pipeline.
Nothing close to that description, but economic risk in that neighborhood. Yes.
Assumed economic risk.
Yes.
Okay,
Right.
next slide, please. And just, you don't have to go back, Ms. Banks, but the 15-year was for chemical.
Correct.
So thinking, hey, we could be closely identified with chemical, the max life would be 15 years if we just went with that.
Chemical generally is to, that capital investment is to get a return of the investment and return on the investment. For this property, that decision has nothing to do with it for CCUS property. It is done for, I'm careful how I say this, it's done for environmental reasons.
Mm-hmm.
It's not done to make sure or try to get a return of your investment or a return on your investment. It's just an environmental expenditure.
But there's an economic element that we'll get to in a little bit that ties it to the new market, to the tax credit that has a 12-year life. So when you're balancing the differences between an 8 to a 15 and then bringing in at risk and so forth, what is being led to is, which I remember and I believe in a summer presentation, was that after the expiration of the tax credit, there's no foreseeable future of what the actual use of those pipes would be.
Correct.
Okay.
At this time, of course,
at this time.
5 years.
Of course.
Yes.
Okay, so now there are these different categories, anywhere from a 5 to a 15. That again, you're identifying these different, I guess, a life cycle, so to speak. That if we get into direct air capture, we're projecting 5. If we're getting into post-combustion, it's this, pre-combustion.
Mhm.
And I don't know if we have to, I don't know enough to know if I'd have to do it all if I'm going to do it, or if I just get to pick and choose, but be that as it may. That's a range from that rationale for proposed equipment, right? So this
Previously
was
proposed. This has been shelved.
understood,
Okay, yes.
right?
okay.
So this was initial.
Mhm.
It said it could go anywhere from 5 to 15.
Correct.
Okay. Next slide, please. That's please. And again, that's basically saying the same thing.
Right.
Okay. So second bullet, simplicity. One economic life was agreed, that being the 12 years. Here's the federal tax credit that's mentioned, right?
Right.
And a statement that there's less economic risk in a chemical world using those life elements than there is perceived to be in carbon capture. And I
Correct.
say perceived, is it proven?
It is not proven,
Okay.
and there's a lot of that value is intangible. There's some value for environmental social governance. That's to
That
that's to
brings
help-
an
that's to
economic
help the stock-
value.
That's to help the stock price. not
Understood?
tangible
Right, there's
equipment.
an economic
Right.
element to that.
Right.
We get this rating as
Yes,
seen
right.
as this correct.
And banks might be more likely to loan to
Un-
you, that type
understood.
of thing.
Okay, so there's that element. So maybe this is where I was coming to. Lateral lines. And I'm assuming lateral lines, that's then taking it to something similar to oil and gas?
Yes,
Using
that's-
lateral?
That's from one source,
Hmm.
one carbon capture source to the transmission line.
Okay,
So in other words, if you lose that source, if you shut down that source, then that there's no use for that line.
which under probably a different chapter, if I'm correct, or is what you're saying that lateral pipelines are being assigned an economic life of 26.5 years?
Currently, for oil and gas, you're talking about?
Hmm.
Yes, I believe that's right.
So what's the
Lateral-
specific mention
lateral lines-
of
I haven't been in oil and gas in a while, so
what is industry reluctant to agree upon for an economic life of 26.5 years? Is that for lateral pipelines? That the carbon capture or the chemical said, we don't want this?
well, yeah, well, you recall from the earlier slides, we propose a much lower value for pipelines. So basically, we agreed to that.
You agreed to a carbon capture pipeline.
Right, well, the 12-year life lateral pipelines, we thought that is logical to go with the lateral equipment. And I think at the end of the day, we didn't want something to blow up our idea of a joint proposal. So we
Okay.
went along with
Okay.
the transmission.
Next slide, please. No, that's fine. Thank you. The industry committee reiterated these wells are dedicated for permanent carbon disposal for environmental benefit. So no other repurposing.
Well, if it
This-
is repurposed later on, then it would go back to the normal chapter 13 pipeline.
So industry and the Assessors Association agreed, value per foot. Okay, you can stay right there. Okay, next table, please, or slide. So I'm going to ask you to try to provide some comfort here, because this is where I'm most uncomfortable. I have no idea what additional sufficient information would be. I mean, to me, this is what it costs to get in. You prove it down the road when there's obsolescence, which in my limited experience here seems to be a way that the assessors, and I agree, I understand this is a joint proposal, but we've heard from assessors within this state that said, hey, wait a second. I get there's a group and I'm a member of that group, but it impacts me this way. So certainly there's some self-interest, but why not do it as it's discovered as opposed to that there's something tangible to assign at that point to decrease the value or accelerate the depreciation as opposed to taking a shorter life on the front end?
The cost approach is one of three approaches to value, as you probably know. But the cost approach is often applied as a limited cost approach, meaning there are three types of appraisal depreciation: physical deterioration, which is composite multiplier generally handle that, and then functional external obsolescence. So, for example, if external obsolescence for a disposal well, in other words, you'd be going through an academic calculation that gets you down to a relatively low value, which we're comfortable that it is a relatively low value because it's a disposal well. It's not for the production of income. It's not. It is very different than in other capital investment. So you could apply an income approach to it, I suppose, a sales approach. We talked about the one sale that I mentioned. That's Petronova outside of Houston. It's sold for less than 0.5%, 0.5% of the cost. It's only a few years old. And so we were not saying, okay, of course, the old adage, one sale doesn't make a market necessarily. So we weren't pushing for that, but it is an indication that there's a lot of risk out there. So with sequestration property, it is, and again, I'm not an engineer, but it's my understanding that those wells have to be committed to disposing CO2, the carbon into the permanently. So it's not a drive. So that is, so that's, I'll get back to your point about the vagueness. You didn't use that word, but of, of it's very general. To, let's see, where's the language? Additional sufficient information becomes available. That could be through sales, if there are more sales of the property. But as I mentioned earlier, we anticipate sales because it's not income driven. It would be included in a package with other property. In other words, you have to take this if you're going to buy this part of it. So, but there could be operational data. There could be, I suppose, if we get past November election, could be if you have a new EPA administration, environmental, and I'm really going out on a limb here because this is where there's a lot of unknowns. The federal tax credits could change significantly. That's additional data. So I don't know. I know I'm still being vague, but
So I'll come back to the economic element. I understand this. So you're citing one sale in the United States,
right.
correct? Anything internationally?
I'm not aware of any. That
Okay.
doesn't say there's not, but I'm not aware. You guys are not.
So that would be a direct sale, but you've also stated that, look, there's a business purpose behind this. If I'm going to get a rating and I'm going to drive shareholder value because I can gain access to capital and do more. That drives income.
Yes, and I will observe, just my observation, there are not very many private firms. In other words, they're not publicly traded who are doing this.
That are not doing it.
Yeah,
I
right.
understand.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. That's driving shareholder value
Right.
and access to capital at the
Right.
publicly traded company. So there's some economic benefit to them that while it's not evidenced by a sale, there is if you get into an income and how you're going to address that, or we're going to address it from this assessor to that assessor.
Right.
And it's like, why didn't you consider
And
that? I'm just trying to flush out
that's
things that
generally
could
an
be.
intangible value. If it enhances the stock price, that would be more of an intangible value than compared to the tangible property at a site. I don't know if that helps.
So was there any, this is my last question, so I'm sorry. Was there any discussion on being more specific in what that type of information could be that you would look at so that it's clear to all?
There was not, but we fall back on our experience. Gabe's been doing this 25 years or so. I've been doing it over 30 years. So we know when additional information comes up, it can, I mean, we've seen this in power plants. A couple of years ago, solar was added to the tax commission rules and regs. So as you have additional information, I know I'm not giving you specific. I'm not trying to avoid your
But
question.
you're answering the question.
Yeah,
There
yeah,
isn't.
right, right.
There isn't sufficient additional information at present that could be presented.
Not now,
Or-
or not.
I'm not sure if it's appropriate, Mr. Chair, but I'd like to speak to the assessor's representative.
Please come to the mic, state your name and your position, please.
Gabe Marceau, assessor in Vermilion Parish, also the president of the Assessors Association.
Thank you, sir. So just from an overall process with your assessors, again, we've heard, not across the board, but there have been assessors that have come forth to say, we don't agree with this. So from your organization's governance structure, certainly there's a board, I would imagine there are officers. The representation across all assessors, and the decision to come to what you consider, whether it's a majority of, or how is it determined that this is best for all assessors across the state while not all will agree?
It's a great question. Um, You're right, you're right. There's a lot of assessors that did not necessarily agree with the proposal. Um, I was hoping I wouldn't be put in this position today. But it is what it is. My name is on this joint proposal. Of the whole association, there's only one name on that joint proposal, and it's mine. So I don't want to, try not to talk against it, for it. I made commitments to the association, made commitments to Bob. In short, we believe that this would be the best place that we would be. We didn't, man, I'm on thin ice, Bob.
Good.
Not, I don't mean to put you in a compromising position.
Yeah.
So if you decide not to, I understand, but what's best for,
We've lost a lot at this table over the years. Our side, we have lost a lot. We didn't want to lose again. We felt this was the best place, the best case scenario for us.
so,
Given historically, I mean, Bob showed you what was presented, right?
Right.
Uh,
so
Good.
I apologize for that. But let me just ask you this question, as I asked Mr. Dare. So the language, I would trust the answer is yes, but the language of additional sufficient information, given your experience and what industry has experienced, there's a comfort that there is going to be an annual analysis of what's happening here
Right.
and what are we seeing in market and how are we reacting? That's a commitment?
I'll say that by adding this language to the proposal, that some heartburn was relieved. I'm not saying it went away, but some heartburn was relieved across our association to say that we can come back. You know, this might be where we start, but if this wasn't in there and we come back next year or whatever year it might be, and we can't do a joint proposal, which I believe we try to be as productive as we can versus years ago, where there was no joint proposal, there was no talk between assessors and industry. It was always a fight. There was never communication at the same table. If there's a day where we believe, our industry believes, that we have information to submit that changes this, we wanted to be able to do that. And by signing a joint proposal without something like that, it was almost signing our name on a dotted line saying, we agree to this in perpetuity. And obviously you stated there's many assessors that don't agree with this.
And understanding the leadership of the association has to
Yeah.
make a call. So I would encourage, I assume it would already be in place since there's been good faith effort on both sides, that on a regular basis, whether that's annually or that this is, parties are meeting and saying, hey, what's happening in the market? This is what we thought. This is what we see. This is what's fair, and continue to work toward in a joint arrangement.
Could I comment a little bit further? Industry started talking about this in 2021, I think, early in 2021. And we posed it in 2023. That's when we started talking to the assessors. So we invited, we turned over every rock we thought we could to get information on CCUS. We looked online in searches, business associations, engineers from groups, from companies. We also asked assessors if you've heard of any information, if you're aware of, what you read, whether it's right or wrong. I mean, we'll look at it. We'll try to find something. So in other words, we tried to find everything we could on this. We started talking, as Gabe said, and it's, bottom line, we'll get back to it. It's a compromise. There's a lot that we don't know. And I've said that, and I'll acknowledge it again. But as far as it yearly, you mentioned ask yearly, I'd say yes, we should look at it, but it could be there might not be any new information in a
Sure.
year or 2 years.
I understand. I'm
Yeah.
not saying that there has to be.
Yeah,
That there's
right.
going to be that there's going to be information. There's no guarantee to that,
Right.
but it's like, hey, what are we hearing? This is what we're experiencing. Well, I don't see that in the market. I've seen this in the market. So at least if there is something there, or at least a common, we've met and there's no new information, we agreed to that.
Right.
Or there is, and this is what we propose, and this is how we're working towards it.
Yeah.
No further questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Any other discussion by the,
Mr. Chair, I have a question. Listen to this, you have one property, you said one that you, it was in Texas you were talking about?
Yes, sir.
And you bought an income producing property with that? You mentioned the income producing that went with this?
It was closed. I think it was closed when it was bought, and then it's since been restarted. But it was certainly in operational condition when it was bought. It is, I don't know if that's where you're going with this, but it was a half, like I said, less than half of 1%. And that detailed comments was included in our 2023 comments, in our proposal.
Okay, and I do like the way that every year, because we're dealing like, when you deal with shopping centers, other things, there's cap rates. Here,
Sure.
there's no cap rate yet, because we haven't officially, we're working on putting together, work with the assessors and as a team, work with that. When we have more of a cap rate as year to year, we can change rules in that. At least we have started from somewhere. So I do like that a lot.
Okay.
Thank you.
is there any other discussion by the commissioners?
I'm just, for one, I want y'all to know that we're not, and I'm just speaking on my behalf, okay? So, and I have a lot of questions about this, and I appreciate y'all's joint proposal that y'all are working together. But we also have to, we get more phone calls just from the assessor in the industry. We also have the taxing bodies that we have to look out for, the taxpayers that we have to look out for when those calls come. So that brings up a lot of the questions when we're talking about the pipeline, lives. Is there any other pipeline in chapter 13 that we're going to depreciate out of chapter 25? Does that exist? I don't think it does. And so there's a lot of things, and a lot of it's theory, like you say. A lot of it's just the idea of it. And I think like what Greg was kind of talking about is, I appreciate that it's wrote in that, we can come back and relook at it again. But to me, that doesn't actually mean that you have to start on the lowest side of everything. And just like you were talking, so we have transmission lines, if we go with 12-year life based on the tax credit, economic life, whatever you want to say. But obviously that pipeline has a chance to be repurposed, I take it. Then at that point, we're changing those pipelines to something totally different. And so I think a lot of what's, for me personally, is to take a pipeline out of chapter 13 that should be in chapter 13, like the other pipelines. Then we're trying to depreciate it in chapter 25, where we don't depreciate none of the other pipelines in. That's an issue. I think the other issue is the year life. We're going to say our transmission is 25 years, but the same pipeline that's running off of it, and I understand the one, so I understand where y'all are coming from, but it's hard to consolidate those two together. And so that's a lot of I think from my side, I'm just speaking for me, that we're struggling with that. We want to do what's best for everybody involved. And if it's not right, we can come back to the table, high or low, whatever. And so I just was going to speak on my behalf where I'm coming from with it. But I do appreciate the joint proposal and y'all trying to work through it. I understand that. But as far as us or me, there's also a lot of other areas that affects other than just the assessor in the industry. And so these are questions that get asked. And without having a very good reason, it's hard to bring the two together.
If I can respond, a couple of things that come to mind. One is, from my discussions with the industry, there's a greater chance of, a greater possibility of a transmission line being repurposed because someone could tie into it. But a lateral line coming directly from an industrial site or from a carbon capture source, there's a much less chance of that being repurposed. And again, that's just from industry discussions I've heard. Also, your questions, I don't read too much into this, but I suspect there might be some politics in the question and from others. And we have not considered politics at all in this. In fact, we made a point not to because projects have been announced. We are merely proposing guidelines or rules that can be applied for companies to model the taxes and for assessors to be able to project it.
I just want to comment on one thing, Mr. Bob. I appreciate you being here today and discussing all of this with us. And, he's in a tough situation with the assessors and having,
I understand.
and I can feel his pain. I was looking at him and I can see, I've been in those positions before. That's tough because you want to keep the lines of communication open, but you have to do what's going to be best for the people that he represents too. So I'm just asking that you would continue to communicate with them and keep those
Will do.
lines of communication open.
I've known Gabe a long time and
Yeah.
we'll continue to do that.
Yeah. Is there any other questions by the commission? Mr. Hoffman, is there anything else that need to come before the commissioners today? If not, I'd ask for a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chair, I have a motion to adjourn.
I have a motion. Consider us adjourned at 11:37.
Thank you.